Chapter 1. Upon the Tower. Tonight be the night he met that man. Rain. It trickled down his ice-pale skin, his crimson hair sticking to the sides of his displeased face. With eyes like hellfire, he stared into the archway ahead, an archway filled with an endless darkness. That was where he had to go, through and into whatever world waited on the other side, and to meet whoever he had been sent to meet. Alucard. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be standing on Aditus Insula, and he didn't want to be spending his evening with a stranger. He had much more important things to be taking care of. But what choice did he have? He stood there, the rain soaking his white fur-collared cape, a cape that was a much darker red than his hair. As a flash of lightning broke the near-black sky above, a tired sigh escaped his breath. He fiddled with the small gold loop earring in his right pointed ear, tucked the loose strands of wet hair behind it, and stepped into the darkness.
Emerging onto the other side of the archway, Alucard found himself in the long, dark, empty, eroded hall of what looked to be an old castle. The smell of damp was something disgusting. Vines had twisted their way through the crumbling white brick, and the ground was made up of leaf litter and dried dirt. What a pleasant place, he thought, as he grimaced in response to the headache that had so suddenly gripped him. He reached into the pocket of his black coat-like blazer, pulling out a small steel flask. Anyone else might think his flask contained alcohol, but it contained one of the only things he could stomach: blood. Unscrewing the lid, he made his way down the hallway, sipping from the flask, hoping the blood would silence his headache, as it would always silence any other pain he felt. The hallway took him to a staircase, and as he climbed it, he glanced out of the windows, setting his eyes on the single silver moon hanging in the sky. What a lowly world this must be to possess just a single moon, he thought. Who the hell had he been sent to meet in such a disappointing place? As he reached the top of the tower, he searched for who he had been sent to meet, but he was alone. The moonlight shined down upon him as he wandered over to the edge of the tower's top and stared out at the world below. The empty grasslands spread for miles upon miles, as far as his hellfire eyes could see, with a single village resting on the horizon. He then glanced behind him, a forest stretching just as far as the grasslands on the opposite side of the ruin. There wasn't much to see here at all. Alucard rested his arms on the wall in front of him and leaned forward, glaring down at the ground below, setting his eyes on a pair of mice as they fought silently. But he could hear them as if they were right in front of him. The sound of approaching footsteps, however, quickly came from behind him, but he didn't bother to turn to face whoever was approaching. He didn't exactly care. He knew that it wasn't Damien, his boss, the man who had sent him here, a man who would approach with distinctive recognition. So why should he care who had come? Whoever was approaching him, though, undeniably caught his attention. Their aura wasn't that of a human, a vampire, or anything he would much rather it be. It was the aura of a demon, an old one. He could feel the creature's power, like a bitter breeze in the night's air, but it didn't unsettle him. It perturbed him. Why was a demon approaching him? Glancing back over his shoulder, he set his eyes on he who had come. The demon's almost black eyes shifted from what Alucard assumed could only be the sword he had at his side. The demon stared back, his eyes shimmering crimson for half a moment in the moonlight. He approached in the form of a 6'3" tall, broad man, his hair black and neatly combed back over his head. He was an almost pale in skin tone, his ears slightly, sharply pointed, just like Alucard's, but possessing a bit of a rounder, more human shape. He dressed as smartly as he looked, adorned in an all-black blazer suit, and as he made his way over, a pleasant smile appeared on his face. Alucard wasn't interested, however. He pulled his cape from his side to conceal his sword, and then glared back out at the village in the distance. Stopping beside Alucard, the demon looked down at him.
Alucard?
He asked quietly, his voice smooth and silvery.
Who's asking?
He replied, glancing back up at him. He wasn't sure how this man knew his name, but considering as it was Damien who had sent him to wait atop this tower, this demon could only be an associate. Perhaps the one Damien had sent him here to meet. Holding out his hand, the demon frowned.
Zaelith.
Staring at his clawed hand, Alucard nodded.
Right.
He grumbled, shaking it.
It is a pleasure to meet you.
He said with a delighted look on his face.
Is it?
Alucard mumbled, letting go of his hand, looking back out at the village. The demon smiled in amusement.
I've heard a lot about you.
That makes one of us.
I assume you are here to also meet with the Sempiternus?
He asked. Looking back up at him, Alucard frowned.
What is it to you?
Zaelith then frowned, keeping his eyes on the man before him, Alucard, this vampire. He may be rather nice to look at, and his thick accent might be an interesting one, but he seemed awfully grouchy. When Damien had said he'd be meeting a vampire here, he expected to find someone a lot more, well, less appealing. But he appeared to the demon as strangely fussy for someone that worked with Damien. The Sempiternus. Did this Alucard have something to prove? Was he nervous? Or just an angry man in general? Zaelith didn't care. He was there for business, heeding Damien's call, and not to make friends, or take the time to ask one question about their attitude. As a look of uncaring appeared on Zaelith's face, he turned away from Alucard and stood on the opposite side of the tower. He felt no need to converse with the vampire further. Why should he? This Alucard didn't matter, and he didn't deserve any of Zaelith's effort to try and form some kind of friendship either.
Glancing over at the demon, Alucard scoffed and reached for his flask again. Was this demon of importance? He wasn't going to have to work with him, was he? The thought made him wish he could complain aloud. But the look on Zaelith's face told him that the demon might enjoy seeing him express irritancy in response to his presence. He wasn't going to entertain, so he sipped from his flask and glared out at the village. Damien should be arriving any moment now. And once he was there, Alucard was sure he was going to find out why he had been called to this new world and why this Zaelith was there.
As the vampire turned his attention elsewhere, Zaelith took a moment to glance back at him once more, a somewhat intrigued smile finding its way to his face. Was this vampire Damien's associate? He wasn't yet sure what to expect. All he could do was hope that this man worked as sleekly as he dressed, which was rather delightful for his eyes to see. But his attention was soon captured by the sound of approaching wings. Both Zaelith and Alucard stood up straight, turning to face the east as a feather-winged man raced through the air over the vast forest, breaking through the clouds above. He soared down and swiftly landed on the top of the tower. He folded his black, purple-tinted wings against his back. The horns atop his head were black in color, one pair like that of a goat, the other pair like a dragon, reaching nearly a foot in height. His appearance alongside his wings and horns was rather strange. His hair was shoulder length, straight and silky, but it split perfectly down the middle, the right side white as snow, the left side black as night. His right eye was an icy blue, his left was red as blood. He stood much over 6 feet tall, looking down at them both as they bowed respectfully. He smiled, a condescending smile, as Alucard looked up at him.
"You found your way here, then?"
He said.
Yes.
Alucard replied, as he and Zaelith stood up straight once more.
Damien, a god of demons. He made Alucard feel all manner of uncomfortable. But Damien was the man Alucard served. So he stared a vacant stare, waiting alongside Zaelith for whatever they had been called there for. Looking at them both, Damien then smiled amusedly.
I'm slightly surprised you haven't torn each other apart. Disappointed, even.
He smirked, walking over to the edge of the tower, where Alucard had been standing. He then leaned back against the wall and looked over at them both as they remained where they were.
Well?
He asked. Alucard frowned slightly.
You never told me why you need me here.
He said slowly, a cautious tone in his voice. He knew better than to speak out of turn, but he didn't want to not know the reason for their meeting.
Damien held out his hand, and as he did, Alucard flinched ever so slightly, a flicker of startle gleaming on his face. It may have only been a flicker, but it was enough for Zaelith to recognize and assume that this vampire may have experienced violence at the hand of Damien before, and that instantly led him to believe that Alucard must be incompetent. If Damien had hit this man, it had to be in response to him failing to do something. He deadpanned. Was he going to be working with an idiot? That was the last thing he needed right now.
So jumpy tonight, aren't we?
Damien asked, looking down at Alucard. However, he stretched out his black claw-tipped fingers and pointed at them.
I need you two to work together,
he said. They both looked at each other. Zaelith could tell he wasn't the only one of them that was unsure of what Damien meant. Work together? As far as Zaelith knew, demons and vampires were natural enemies in Alvengard, the world where Alucard came from. Why would Damien ask them to work together? For amusement? Was this a test? Zaelith frowned as he set his eyes back on Damien.
I assume this is related to the cause?
He asked, a calm tone in his voice.
The child?
The vampire frowned as Zaelith glanced over at him, clearly unsure of what the cause might be. Had Damien even told this vampire what was going on?
Of course.
Damien shrugged.
One day we will initiate the creation of another Daedalus so that I may gain access to my siblings' bloodlines. But that day is not today. I have foreseen a future, one where I need you both to work together. I plan to sabotage Leafoldus. You both know of my plan to overthrow my brother. And one way to do so is to fill his world with creatures not of his magic, of his ethos, as it has come to be called. It just so happens that Zaelith possesses what I need, and I possess what he needs,
he said, slowly switching his gaze to Alucard. Ethos? Zaelith had never heard this term before, but since Damien had first referred to it as magic, he could safely assume that ethos was simply what he would call magic in his own world. It was interesting to know that some things had different names in different worlds, considering as all the worlds were founded by the same gods. Alucard frowned.
What is that?
Well, you are the Lord of Vampires, are you not?
Damien said, a somewhat condescending tone in his voice.
You are the only one capable of assisting Zaelith.
They both waited.
A war has broken out in this land,
Damien said, nodding back over his shoulder at the world below.
And it has endangered the vampiric population. Zaelith wishes to save them from extinction, and the only other realm that can harbor vampiric ethos is your own, Alvengard,
he explained, pointing to Alucard.
You will assist Zaelith in transporting the vampire population to Alvengard, since you could do so without being detected by Leafoldus. If you were to detect ethos not of his origin entering the world, he would be on it faster than anyone might comprehend. Your aura will mask those of the vampires that need transporting, so you will bring them to Alvengard for me, for Zaelith.
Zaelith then looked over at Alucard.
We must begin momentarily,
he said, the same supercilious tone in his voice that Damien possessed.
Alucard scowled. Both of them were talking to him as if he were incapable. How nice. He glowered at Zaelith, sure that if the circumstances were different, he would have hit this demon by now. But he didn't argue, He couldn't. He knew what would come of it if he did. He set his eyes back on Damien, listening to his every word.
Every vampire is linked to you the same way all demons are linked to me. Well, most.
Damien continued with a shrug, staring down at Alucard as though he was a child.
Leofoldus is aware of your existence, so he ignores your aura. Having the vampires close to yourself will mask their ethos when entering the realm. Just as I said, Leofoldus will simply think you are traveling back and forth from Eltaria a lot more often than usual. I'm confident he will think nothing of it.
The vampire then looked over at Zalith.
Why do you care so much about vampires? You are a demon. We are natural enemies.
I owe it to them.
He said simply.
They have remained loyal throughout the war, and their numbers are withering. Those that are left deserve to survive, and so I wish to find a safe place for them until one day I can make everything right again, so that they may return.
Frowning, Alucard looked over at Damien. He didn't really care much for Zalith's reasons. He had no choice either way to do what Damien had asked, but he wasn't yet finished with his questions.
You never have me help anyone without them giving me something in return. What will that be?
He asked slowly.
In the future I saw, it revealed Zalith will play a part in creating a bond between two people that will one day save your life.
He explained with apparent disinterest.
Your father is still after you. You are only currently safe because I am keeping you hidden. The future I saw was not clear, but I'm sure in the fact that, however you and Zalith may end up after this mission, this demon will one day play a part in your father's demise. Or perhaps something else that causes your life to be in danger. That wouldn't surprise me. You have to get yourself wrapped up in things I'd really rather not deal with.
The vampire looked over at the demon, ignoring Damien's derogatory speech.
And you are on board with this?
He nodded. Slowly, Alucard looked back over at Damien. Two people would one day save his life, and Zalith was somehow connected to them.
These two people, who are they?
He asked.
You'll know when you see them, I'm sure. When they come, I'll be rid of you at long last.
He mumbled. Alucard frowned. The chance to be free of Damien. How so very relieving that sounded. He looked over at Zalith. No further convincing needed.
Fine.
He muttered, holding out his hand.
Let's start again.
He offered, a nicer, calmer tone in his voice. Smirking, Zalith turned to face Alucard and shook his hand.
I look forward to working with you.
The vampire knew that was a lie, but he smirked anyway.
Likewise.
Damien then sighed.
Right, great. We're all friends now. Now I must get back, but you two will remain here until you have discussed your plan or whatever it is you do. I want all those vampires in Alvengard by this time next year. No later. And Leofoldus catches on. You're on your own.
He said, pointing at Alucard. Then he set his eyes on Zalith.
And you, be careful. If you lay a hand on him, I'll cut it off. Permanently.
Then he aggressively flapped his wings, racing up into the sky above, disappearing through the clouds. As he disappeared, Alucard snarled quietly.
Dracul. Arrogant fuck.
He grumbled. Yet he wasn't referring to Damien. He simply thought it funny to make it look as though he was.
A slight smile of amusement found its way to Zalith's face, but as Alucard looked at him, he frowned with seriousness. He had work to do, and very little time.
There are 115 vampires that need moving. We will meet here before each transferal. Damien may have given us a year, but I need them moved as soon as possible. Over the course of a month would be preferable.
Alucard frowned disapprovingly.
We were given a year, and the year I shall use. I can only take so many back off the island that portal leads to, 15 a time at most. I will come monthly. I have my own business to attend to back on. I will also begin no earlier than tomorrow. I have something to clear up before I start bringing vampires home. Whether that is okay with you or not, I am now leaving,
he said. Zaelith, as much as he wanted to take charge, felt no motivation to fight him at this time. He was tired and low on any kind of will, so he sighed.
Then I will see you here tomorrow,
he said.
Whatever.
Alucard mumbled, waving his hand in dismissal, as he turned around and made his way back down the stairs. Why he was being made to work with a demon, he wasn't going to understand. But it was Damien's order, and he knew that if he didn't do as that creature asked, he'd be no better off. He made his way down the stairs, back into the hallway, and towards the portal. This was, to date, the strangest assignment he had been given. But there was no point in questioning it. Damien was looking to undermine Lethodus by bringing outside ethos into Alvengard, and this was going to be his first of many missions involving such a task. Why did he have to work with Zaelith, though? Why couldn't he just do it by himself? He couldn't be bothered to think about it. He just wanted to get back to his own world and continue with what he had been doing before being summoned.